just like once you free yourself up, that's when you find yourself. It's like that's all it is. It's just about approaching things in the right way and getting something out of it, and making sure that you always have to check that you're happy and that you're doing things for the right reason.
Welcome to the Flying Fruit Bowl, a platform dedicated to the discussion and exploration of art and the creative process. Recently, I had the chance to talk to the incredible Sacred Monolith. Sacred Monolith is an artist and illustrator from the UK who creates esoteric images that evoke a sense of mystery and intrigue. We had an extremely great, lengthy conversation, and this is the first part of 3. I really enjoyed this interesting conversation, and I really hope you enjoyed it too. Okay, so as an introduction is the best place to start, which I always kind of talk to everybody about. So the first question really, or the best place to start, is for you to tell us a bit about yourself and how you became an artist.
So I have always, as far as I can remember, been somebody that does art, painting, drawing, whatever it may be, sculpting, making things, super creative. And that's just my natural instinct, I suppose, maybe because my mum was an art teacher and she raised me to be like that. But I have to say, honestly, that I can remember being in primary school and all of the teachers were talking as though it was a done deal that that's what I was going to be, So it was almost just always been the case, to the point where I sometimes think, oh, maybe I should just do something else to kind of like rebel, because I feel like it almost feels like I've been put on this path. It's just what I've always done, honestly. So I can't really think of a time when I decided to start, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense, and that's quite nice though, because then you already had that validation early on, so that you didn't have to kind of necessarily discover it yourself in the same way as a lot of other people do.
True. Well, I never attached any status to it. I didn't think it was a cool thing to do. I didn't think that it was. I know that people think that like calling themselves an artist means something, in terms of some people think that has a certain, the connotations attached to it, or it has some status. I don't really care. I just see it as like, I could be saying any title of a job, and somebody might choose to look at what I do and say that isn't art, and then I'd just be like, that's fine. Whatever the word is that you call it, that's okay. It's just what I do. So that's what I do, and it's not really something. Yeah. So when it comes to sort of like validation, I don't know. I mean, there was a time when I was young, maybe when I was a teenager, where I felt like I really wanted to be validated by someone else, but that's not really where I'm coming from at all. Honestly, if everyone hated it, then I would just be doing it because it's what I do, if that makes sense. Maybe it's just an instinct, or it's like a therapeutic.
Like absolutely. And actually, as I said to you a minute ago about order being out of order, this is where it's a perfect example, because one of the questions I was going to ask you at the end, which I'm going to ask you now, which is perfect, is if nobody saw your work, would you still create it? I think that's an important question to ask artists, because
that's a really interesting question, because I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, that it seems like it's the same thing, but it's as what we were just talking about, but there's a subtle difference. And so where I used to do work so intensely all the time, really productive, and then when I decided that I just didn't like, I felt like it had become a toxic thing for me, where I was not enjoying the pressure that people were putting me under, and it wasn't pleasant for me, and I just wanted to stop. When I did that, I shut down all of my social media and things like that, and there was no place for me to show work to anyone. I'd kind of cut all ties, and then I stopped doing it. It wasn't like I carried on doing drawing for myself at home. You know, I just stopped making work completely because there was no place for me to send the work at the end. So I actually don't think I would keep doing it if there was no one to show it to. It's a form of communication. So it'd be kind of like speaking to yourself. You feel like you're going mad, you know?
See, that's a really interesting answer, because that's a completely different answer to anybody else I've asked so
Oh, really?
far. So yeah, that's actually really interesting. It's a really interesting way to look at it in terms of art as a form of communication.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's very true.
For sure. The process of doing the work is therapy, but the actual, it's therapy. For example, it's therapy. Okay, so what is therapy? Therapy is where you sit in a room and a lot of the time, like the traditional therapist situation, you sit in a room and you talk to someone. If there wasn't another person sitting there, you'd be talking to yourself. Is that even if a therapist doesn't say anything, for you to see that they're there and they're giving you time and they're listening to you, that's why people pay for therapy. And if that person wasn't there, you just wouldn't feel like you were exercising anything. You just feel like you're saying things to yourself. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to work for me. Like, I do definitely think that humans are social creatures, and there's an entire realm of where we interact that is very interesting, and that's very important. And I do feel like if you take that away, then you get into the territory of the objective value of what you create. So I don't. This might sound like a massive tangent, but have you ever heard of a guy called Yuval Noah Harari? He's an author. He wrote a book called *Sapiens*.
No, I haven't, but I've heard of the book.
So yeah, it's a really good book. I highly recommend that. It's a brilliant book. But one of the things that he talks about, in whether it's in *Sapiens* or whether it's in one of his other books, but he talks about, for example, he talks about money, right? And this is such good. This is where every now and then you come across a concept that you've just never heard of before, and it kind of just changes the way you look at things. That's one of the reasons I recommend him as an author, because he's full of things like that. And he talks about money, and he says that most people are familiar with the idea of the objective and the subjective, right? So you've got the objective value of a £5 note is that it's a piece of paper. So you could say, if you need a piece of paper to, use as a coaster or something, that's its objective value, right? But then the subjective value of it is like, it's anything that you imagine it to be. So that would be like, if you decided you're going to be like super imaginative, like a little kid, you could say this is an aeroplane and fold it into a paper aeroplane, or you could imagine that it's like a car and play with it like a toy car. You can do whatever you want with it. So the realm of the subjective is like endless. But in actual fact, nobody treats money as in the objective sense or the subjective sense. Everyone treats money in a far more unique way. And this is the thing that Yuval Noah Harari talked about, which was a new concept for me, which is the idea of the intersubjective realm. So that's the realm of the things that they carry a value because everybody decides it does. So only money only has the value that everybody decides it has, right? So like a £5 note is worth £5 because everybody has decided that it's worth £5, and £5 is an idea, but it has real life objective value because it will get you £5 worth of things that of, let's say, food to eat. But that can go a long way, because obviously money can get you anything. It can get you a big house, or not anything, but it can get you materially, it can get you a hell of a lot. So the world of the intersubjective is like where society, no one person can control it. Like a million people with all of their different toing and froing and pushing and pulling create the value of something that that it's just kind of in flux between everybody's imagination, and no one person could turn up and say, I've decided £5 is actually worth £1,000. Everyone would just be like, no, we're not allowing that. But no one else could come, equally, you couldn't come along and say £5 is now only worth what it's just a piece of paper. It no longer has any value, because no one person can control it. It's this kind of big kind of imaginary realm that everybody has a stake in. So, you need everyone to agree that it's worth more or less for it to be worth more or less. And that's the kind of realm of art, in my opinion. You're dealing with people's imaginations en masse. You're dealing with like a whole society of people, and they could decide that what you're doing is abhorrent and disgusting and you should go to jail, or they could decide that what you're doing is incredible and amazing and you should be revered and there should be statues of you outside, or whatever. Or you could be somewhere in the middle, and you can't control it. But without that, it's a lot less interesting, because you're left with either if you're in isolation of the rest of humanity, then what you make is either completely subjective, you can imagine it to be whatever you want, in which case go at it, you could do whatever you want, or it's completely objective, in which case it's like totally you make something and its value is whatever it does for you, as an object. So yeah, I can't really see myself making the kind of work that I do like in a vacuum at all. I don't really see how it would. That's where all the interesting stuff is. It's where people's reactions, if that makes sense.
Yes, oh, absolutely. And actually, that brings me on to another question I was going to ask you much later, but I'll ask you it now because now's the more appropriate time, I guess. Okay. But there is a quote from a sculptor called Brian Booth Craig. I just looked at his name the other day. Brian Booth Craig. And in a podcast, he said that a piece of art is not finished until the viewer sees it. Do you agree with this? And what are your thoughts on that kind of idea?
I mean, I think that the concept behind that statement is interesting, let's say. So I find that interesting. That is the realm of what I find interesting right there. It's that's similar thing to what I was just talking about, the whole sort of intersubjective thing. So in that sense, I'm with it completely. But I think that, when you're making kind of short, sharp, concise statements, you have to be a little bit economical with words. And so maybe I don't necessarily agree with the way that is worded. It doesn't strike me as being entirely correct, if that makes sense.
That might be the way I paraphrased it, as opposed to it might not be a direct quote. It might be the way I paraphrased.
Okay, well, I mean, even so, broadly speaking, the concept is definitely, I would say that it's along the right lines, and that's how people. That's the important thing for people to appreciate, I think, when it comes to art. Yeah, I do think it's yeah, I agree, I guess. Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so let's go rewind a little bit.
Okay.
Let's go rewind. Let's rewind a little bit. Because I want to get a good sense of yourself, because I'm super intrigued just by you generally, from both your work and also because you have an alias. So
right.
Where did the name Sacred Monolith come from?
Yeah, so that's from one of the things which has changed from where doing art was just always a thing that I did, and it was just very natural, and I presented myself to the world as myself, and everyone around me at the time when I first started to sell work and get my name out was doing street art at the time. It was around the time of when Banksy got really big, and you have all of the kind of artists that came along. So, you've got people like D-Face and Black the Rat. There's just like loads of these, Swoon, all of these like huge street artists, and it was all about having an alias. And at the time, I respected all of my friends that were involved in that scene. Not to say that those people I named were my group of friends; those are like the big names. But that I respected my friends that were in that scene, but I kind of fancied myself as being, not part of it. I was like proud that I was just from the classic tradition of just someone that does art, and they present themselves as who they are, and that's that. And there's obviously a very, very logical reason why street artists use a pseudonym, because it's illegal. But one of the things that I did when I took a hiatus from art was I worked in branding as a graphic designer, because that was just a really easy way of transferring my skills into a sort of secure kind of career. So working as a graphic designer, doing branding for companies, and I learned a lot about how to think about branding and how to present yourself. And when I look back at some of the things that I had put out there in the past, some of them I was like, yeah, I nailed it. And then some of them I was like, oh my God, I hate the way I did this. I hate the way I presented this. I could have done such a better job. And I started to realize that even though I was using my name, it's still a brand. And I most definitely was fundamentally making a brand which encapsulated all of my work as a way of presenting myself. And that might sound like a weird thing to say, but it's definitely the case. And it doesn't matter who the artist is. You could be talking about Leonardo da Vinci, and it may be the case that he's, an absolutely genius, great, one of the great minds of humanity, and an absolute innovator, and all of the things that he was. But it is also, unfortunately, still a brand, and his name obviously has connotations that are very, very positive. I think that any brand nowadays would love to be able to have the kind of power that his name's got, even the hundreds of 500 years after his death. And that's the bottom line. So that's one really cold clinical way of looking at this, is that I was looking back at my work and going, you know what, did I do a good job of branding myself? Because I was just being very natural and just being me. But at the same time, where could I have improved it and where could I have not improved it? At the same time, I absolutely hated, and one of the things that made me decide that I wanted to stop doing it, I hated some of the attention that I got from people when I had work that I did work at the time that I was surprised by how popular it was, because I just used to do what I did and put it out there. And then there are certain things that I did that got sort of millions of hits and millions of views, whatever, online. And I remember absolutely hating that. And I never really thought that would happen. And it was traumatic, to be honest. So I was like just minding my business and doing what I do. And then suddenly one day I have like, I don't know, 5,000 emails. And I'm like, there must be something wrong with my inbox, and then something's gone viral online and I'm getting like a million hits. And I hated it, absolutely hated it. And I felt horrible for like about a week. And then it kind of adjusted everything. Like it burst my little bubble of my ego, because it's a part of human nature. You know how somebody goes to a restaurant that has 10 great experiences, then they have one horrible experience and they just remember the horrible experience. So you'll see like 50 people saying really, really positive, really nice things. And then one person says something really dickish, something really, really like offensive or whatever. And then you just go, oh, like, oh, I wish I didn't read that. And and those things just scale up. So if you show your work to, I don't know, 1,000 people, you might get one person that's kind of a bit of an asshole, and then you're like, oh, that one person's kind of annoyed me. Then, okay, so then 10,000, you get 10 people that are a bit of an asshole, and then when it gets up to like 1 million, that's too much dickishness for one person to take in. If you're affected by it, no one's like trained me to be able to deal with it. It's just like, fuck, I hate this. So I realized that my goal wasn't necessarily to be successful per se, because I realized that this is not in any way what I wanted. I just want to be able to do art and for it to be therapeutic for me. And that was not therapeutic at all. That was like a pressurized situation. It was an unpleasant situation. And, it's not what I'm about. So that's one of the things that made me decide to stop. So I'd always said to myself, if I ever decide to come back to doing it, it would have to be under a pseudonym. And actually, I was the fool all along because my friends had the right idea, So that was kind of like my little lesson that I'd learned. And then maybe, I don't know, 5 years into doing other things, I started to feel like I really, really feel like there's something missing from my life right now. And, I'm wondering what it is. And it had always kind of bugged me, sort of, that I had just kind of dropped something that was really special. And there was a lot about that meant so much to me. There was another trauma in a way for me to kind of cut. It was like cutting off a limb, like just cutting this whole thing dead. It was a really weird thing for me to do. So I thought, it had been in my mind that I do want to do art again. And then when the lockdowns happened and everything just kind of changed, I suddenly realized, okay, I'm not commuting to my job and I'm not going out in the evening. I'm now at home a lot. And how do I make this small flat in London feel a whole lot bigger? I think I need to start drawing again. So then I started, but then I decided to try and use my branding experience. And I thought to myself, let's think about this. What is it that I want to do? What am I trying to do? I don't want anything that I do to feel arbitrary or like it's there for no reason. I don't want to use some pseudonym that's just like, it just sounded cool and it's just, like some vacuous thing. What can I, for me, the good branding is always something that kind of ties in and adds to and enriches the the content of whatever you're creating, or products that companies make, or whatever it may be. So I started applying that kind of thinking, and I thought, well, there needs to be a lot going on here for this to make sense. It needs to not be just like one thing. And so I thought, okay, well, let's start with what's the type of work that I want to do. I've always wanted to do, and it's always been a key thing for me. I've always wanted to do work that's kind of dark and weird, but beautiful at the same time. So I want to be able to surprise people with beautiful and fragile moments, but I want to also kind of like maybe make people stand back a little bit when they see the weirdness of some of the work too. And so I just wanted to sort of lure people in a way where they kind of feel cautious, but they feel drawn in. And so that's the type of emotion that I want to create. And that's quite a hard thing to do because you have to make something that's sort of beautiful, but has kind of frightening elements as well. I don't know. It's not necessarily an easy thing to do, and I also definitely am interest. I wanted to have a little bit of a departure from just the sort of things that I used to do in the past, and something that I'm really passionate about and really love is one of the things I'm really into is like sci-fi, science fiction. So I was looking there, and I was thinking along those lines of like kind of dark and weird but beautiful things. And I'm totally obsessed with certain types of electronic music, like really, really weird, abstract electronic music. I love Aphex Twins, one of my favorites. I really love Square Pusher, I like Venetian Snares. I like lots of different types of music, but there's just one particular thing that I'm like really, really obsessed with. And all of these things kind of floating around. And then I thought to myself, well, okay, that monolith in 2001: A Space Odyssey is kind of like the closest thing to a symbol that represents what I'm trying to do, because it's just something that just stands there and it's just ominous, but it's kind of like attractive, and people are just drawn to it. And the way that that film, I personally love that film. And one of the things that I love about it is that the there are questions that don't get answered, you know, like the suspense remains. And that's why it remains a classic movie all these years later, because the suspense is still there when the movie's over. They don't kind of package it up for you, put a bow around it and then go, okay, it's done. They leave you hanging. So I thought, okay, that, and essentially I'm making images or symbols here. That's what my job is in a way. And that's a pretty good symbol right there. That's a kind of a symbol for what I'm trying to do. And so that's kind of where it started, and it kind of evolved from there. So, you know, there are lots of things that I played around with, but I suppose I've already talked about it for long enough. So I suppose to kind of wrap that up, I kind of liked the idea of the name Sacred Monolith because of, you know, a few reasons there, but more or less the ones that I mentioned, that I'm trying to make my work into this kind of ominous thing that people are drawn to in a way which is, it feels like that would be the goal, right? It's like, it doesn't mean say I've achieved my goal, but it's just like, let me put, you know, this, let me at least calibrate myself towards this target and say, okay, that's the goal. The goal is to have work that achieves this effect. That's something I want to put out in the world, and I want people to feel that kind of feeling towards it, that it's sort of beautiful but ominous and dark and weird, and it draws them in. They're not sure why. And so yeah, I'm kind of referencing the monolith um, from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Sacred Monolith, that's like more into religious references there. I'm not a religious person at all, but I'm very interested in some of the ancient symbols that you find in religious stories and things like that. So things like, you know, like one piece I recently did was a snake kind of surrounded by apples. And that's like Garden of Eden symbolism. It just allows me to expand on those themes, which are what I personally really enjoy. So I can just keep on doing loads of dark, beautiful imagery that references, you know, ancient symbolism and things like that. And I just felt like that really enhanced it. So the name actually enhances it, and but also I felt like it was quite well positioned because it is vague enough that it gave me room to do whatever I want, really, you know. So very limiting brand names are kind of lame in a way, because then you just kind of end up having to do the same thing all the time, you know. So I could have easily gone like, oh, I like drawing skulls, let me do something skulls in the name, and then now I'm stuck drawing skulls forever, What if I decide I don't want to? Bottom line is, I want to feel like I can do whatever the fuck I want to do, right? So if I wake up tomorrow and I decide, actually, I want to draw fairies, that's what I'm going to do. If that's what I feel like, I want to make sure that I don't cage myself in. I don't want to make a rod for my own back. So that's that. And it's a weird thing, but it's just like once you free yourself up, that's when you find yourself. It's like that's all it is. It's just about, I don't know. It's about approaching things in the right way and getting something out of it and making sure that you always have to check that you're happy, that you're doing things for the right reason, and things are going the way that you want them to. And that's why for me, I was like deep into doing art, and it had worked out miraculously in a way, in the sense of like having some what looked like success to people. I was just like, fuck it, I don't care. I can throw this away. I can throw the baby out of the bathwater if I have to. I don't care, because what I value is the feeling of feeling like a free spirit, feeling like I can do what I want.
So that's like super interesting, and I've never met anybody who can do that or who has done that. So I'm really fascinated. I mean, to be honest, that's really incredible, and I think it's really fascinating. There's a lot I can say about that, but I won't say that now. But yeah, I respect that. I would say that much. Like, I respect that, because I think that isn't necessarily an easy decision for anybody to make. Because of the society we live in, and that's something we'll definitely talk about later, but that's not right now. So let me continue with this little section I have currently. So did you study art, and what are your thoughts on art education?
Well, that's an interesting subject. So, as I said, my mum was an art teacher. And I have to say, I'm really grateful to my mum for instilling certain values, or I don't know, it's almost like a little trick that she played on me when I was a kid. It was like positive reinforcement. She'd tell me I could do whatever I want, and then I'd do some drawings, and then I'm assuming that I wasn't drawing like something that really fucked up that you just don't want your kids to draw. Like, I'm assuming I wasn't drawing like people getting shot down in the streets or something. It's probably just typical kiddie drawings with like smiley faces and little triangle, and you say, "What's that triangle?" He's like, "Oh, that's our dog," or something. It's just like, she would just tell me, yeah, she would just tell me it was brilliant. Every time I did a drawing, she'd tell me it's brilliant, and she really created this like positive cycle, and it like in my behavioral patterns, like it was something that got imprinted in my brain, and it sort of becomes part of your psyche, or part of how you kind of interact with the world. And that is so valuable. Everyone's got their own things that are valuable like that to them, so everyone's got different things that they've experienced, hopefully, that have been encouraged in them. For me, that was art. I suppose it could have been anything. And I don't know how much is nature and how much is nurture in those situations, but that to me is education. That's art education. So that's what I value. I mean, with all of the negative things that, just like anyone, that I've gone through in my life, that positive cycle that my mum had kind of created when I was probably a toddler or something, through positive reinforcement, has made its way all the way through to here when I'm in my late 30s, and it's still going strong. It's like this thing which will keep going until the day I die, probably. And that for me is our education. The education system is a different thing altogether, and I really don't give a shit about it at all. So what I mean by that is, when someone, it's fine, and I don't have a problem with it, and I respect everyone who is involved in this, and I respect, just like I respect my mum. I've had some great art teachers, but when you have when someone creates a system where you set a goal and then people have to meet that goal, and then they get graded on how well they met that goal. That is not the same as art. Does that make sense? So for me,
Yeah, it
for
does.
me, um, have like that's fine because people need to have a system of rules in order to grade people. But it is totally contrary to what we know as a fact about art based on art history. So for me, art history is a more interesting. I don't say more interesting; it's all interesting to me. But art history, I am probably more. Um, I'd be more interested in pursuing art history education because you're dealing with. I mean, there are still murky areas there, but you're dealing with basically you're dealing with knowledge. I don't think when you deal with art, you're dealing with knowledge. I don't think that you are. I think that when you do art, you're in the realm of expression and communication, and really, no one has a right to tell you whether that's good or bad, to fail you or not. I mean, it's like if you have witnesses to a murder, how many of them uh, are correct in any of their recollections of anything that happens? Everyone interprets everything differently. So who's to say that when someone does something which is already quite hard to put your finger on anyway, it's not like witnessing a murder. This is like someone's made a piece of abstract art. So there's nothing obvious or explicit or literal that's being said. It's an abstract piece of art, let's say, for this example. So somebody makes an abstract painting and then they show it to a room of 20 people, right? And you could show someone something which is not abstract and 20 people walk away with a different idea of what they just saw. So how do you justify grading someone on that? How could you? You can't. But because the society needs to somehow capitalist society needs to somehow encapsulate art somehow because art is needed for the world to be interesting and for there's imagine the world without art. Obviously, it's vital. So they have to put these steps in place for people to pursue a quote unquote art education. But really and truly, it's a massive cliche, but as Picasso said, every child is an artist. Um, there's absolutely no way that you can choose you can cultivate your own tastes and you can. I mean, I'm certainly very discerning in what I do and don't like because I've spent a lot of time in my life looking at and thinking about various forms of art or artistic expression. So I might have very strong opinion of that I don't like this piece of music at all, or I don't like this painting at all. But then you might show me that same painting 2 years later, and I might tell you that I love it because I've changed my mind. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave us? It doesn't really leave us anywhere. Everyone just the the more free people feel, the less constrained by pressure and the less conscious of what other people think of them people are, the better it is because I personally really value true expression. And so an institution training you and grading you in something is the antithesis of an environment that would encourage that. That's my personal view. So am I against art education? No, I'm totally all for it because I want more people to do art. So, with all of that being said and done, I'm so grateful that art education exists. But at the same time, I personally, I would never ever be able to give a shit about someone grading my work. I wouldn't be able to find it in myself to care. Like I just like it doesn't. It's like that flame isn't there. It's like it's just not there. That candle isn't burning. I don't care. So I would never ever put the effort in. That makes sense. I just wouldn't because of that whole setup. I'd just be like, meh, don't care.
So you raised a really interesting point, actually, and that is about authenticity. Because I think, having gone through the education system myself, I think it's a good point that you're graded on your work. And because you're graded on your work, you kind of conform to a certain set of rules or a certain set of standards. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, in the real world of art, that's not how it works out.
Mm-hmm.
You could do whatever the hell you want to, and no one's going to tell you whether it's good or bad, or no one's going to tell you that you should or you shouldn't do it.
True. True.
So as an artist, does the endless possibility of being able to create anything make it harder for you to know what to create?
No, not for me. No, I understand people feeling like that, but for me, that's not the case because I have got myself on a particular track, like I'm on a particular train of thought, and it's really easy for me to. I mean, limitations are really important to help you know what to do, but I feel like I've got myself in a situation where the boundaries are pretty good and there's so much for me to still do that it's like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get the time to do all the ideas that I've got. So I'm quite happy to, honestly, I'm like, just every time I kind of embark on a new piece of work, I'm just, I'm I feel like I'm ticking off like something from this like enormous list that I've got in the back of my head. It'd probably be, speaking of like things being therapeutic, it'd be therapeutic of me to write instead of draw or paint and like literally write a list of like everything in my head and just have it out external rather than in my head. It's just an endless list and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And I would draw something like today that was something that was floating around in my head a month ago. Um, and I'm quite happy for, even if ideas pop into my head, I'm happy for them to be forgotten as well because I'm quite sort of Darwinistic about it. I just think to myself, the ideas that survive and make their way into a piece are the ones that were worthy. Only the strong survive in terms of
Yeah.
the ideas, the concepts. So yeah, I want things to filter out. I want, if something struck me as being a great idea today, and then in a week's time I'd forgotten it, then it can't have been that good. That's the way I see it, because I really want to do things that strike a chord with me. That they, yeah. So there's no shortage of things to do, and in the realm of the kind of work that I'm doing, it just goes on and on and on. And you can, and there are also sort of various types of good practice that I personally like to do. So there's a pragmatic aspect to it, but let's say, okay, so everyone says that it's really important to always do life drawing, right? That's considered to be good practice in the world of art, in the traditional Western kind of training. Going all the way back to like the Renaissance and things like that, and drawing nude ladies all the time. But I don't like to have to deal with people when it comes to me wanting to get something done, because I don't like to have any barriers. So I personally like to sort of break down, well, why is that important? Why is it important to do life drawing? It's because natural forms are, in my personal view, they're the most interesting and they're the most compelling things to capture. I'm not big on, that's just me personally, but I'm not big. I do a little bit of it, but I'm not big on drawing like man-made objects. I'm more into natural things and people with their asymmetry and their unusual faces and unusual body shapes. That's where the interest lies. That's why it's, again, it's just my personal opinion, but that's why it's super boring when you see some like super model person who's on the front of every magazine. But when you look at a Lucian Freud painting of someone, it's really interesting because it's the asymmetry and it's the kind of folds in the fat and the muscles, the way they go around the limbs moving around and the contortions in the body shapes and things like that. It's really, really interesting and beautiful. But people are sometimes difficult to organize, and I don't like to have to deal with that. So I personally love to draw flowers because it's easy access and it has everything that, in my opinion, that life drawing has. It has all of the same qualities to it. It's a naturally formed thing. It's uh, endlessly interesting and beautiful to look at. You can study it in terms of color. You can study it in terms of shape. You can approach it in any way you want. There are millions of different types of flowers out there. It's not hard to get hold of one. So I like to always keep my skills up, and I like to practice. And it also means that I've always got something to keep me busy if I was to run out of ideas anyway, because I would be, in a perfect world, I would go out and pick a flower and draw it at least once a week, which I don't do because I'm too engrossed in trying to get my ideas out of my head. But that would be, in an ideal world, I'd have a few less ideas and I'd have a little bit more time to do that, because I just want to keep that thread going through my work forever, where I'm constantly returning to the basics of, a piece of paper, whatever it is you're using, whether it's charcoal or a pen or a pencil, and a flower in front of you, and then you just draw it. So yeah, that's kind of the pragmatic side of it too. So I don't think that you even need to have ideas necessarily. You just need to be, you just need to work and keep working, keep drawing, or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, so the next question I have for you then is, so what is the most challenging part of being an artist?
Probably making money from it. That's what I would say, because there has to be a practical kind of logistical side to anything that you do. I mean, doing art is, it's all well and good that if you're doing art, you're able to indulge in things that maybe someone who has a different job can't, and you're able to spend your time expressing ideas, or it might be a huge technical challenge that you just love to try and make something work, and that's a lot of time. But the practical reality is that you have to be able to, time is expensive, right? So
yeah,
you have to be able to afford to spend that time on that project or that idea, and it's not, time is expensive, and in order to be able to spend that time doing something that you've chosen to do, you have to have money, and that's the reality of it, because the staying alive costs money. So when I did my first art career round, it was like a practice round. That's what I look at it as now. I think I always did look at it like that in a way. I was making a system, a feedback loop in my life where I made sure that this thing that I was doing that I loved to do was making enough money to justify its own existence. So it was going round and around in a circle. And that is the key to, um, I mean, it's too simplistic to say you getting good at something, because when it comes to something like art, you know, it's a little bit more subjective, and it's not so clear what is good and what is not good. But I would say that with anything, the more time you spend, the better you get at it. And in order for you to be able to spend that time, you need to be able to make it viable that you can do it every day. For you to do it every day, well, some people, they've got £10 billion from their mum and dad. That's fine. But that's one of the problems that I think with society is that the creative fields, they are so important and so influential to culture and to the way people see the world, and they become the domain purely of the privileged because no one else can afford to do it. And that is a huge shame, because then all you have is the perspective of people that, is it that interesting to, the perspective of someone who has never had to worry about anything, like money wise? I mean, it's interesting because all people are interesting because of their characters. But would it not be really interesting to see what someone comes up with who has really, really seen some shit and been through some shit? That's like why you have things like the blues. You've got people out there that are like playing 1-string guitars because they couldn't afford to get a 6-string guitar, and they've made the best music ever because they've become highly, highly creative with what they've got, and they've become way more innovative than anyone who doesn't need to be would ever become. And that's the biggest challenge.
You raise a very interesting point. And I really agree with you on that stance. And I think actually it's a really interesting stance of this idea of who are the people creating the work, and where have they came from, and what have they seen to be creating the work, and how does that then feed into the future of art, and to what people deem to be good art and what people deem to be sellable art, which I say really consideration in terms of on a larger scale, as opposed to, oh, this person's creating great work. I think that's actually a really good consideration, not something I've thought about actually. So yeah, I appreciate saying that. So what do you think needs to change then, or what could be changed that can help the situation turn around somewhat
I
slightly?
just think everyone needs to work on themselves and not worry about the rest of it. But for me, I got myself to a place where I don't give a fuck at all. And
Yeah, which is good.
now it's game over because no one can tell me. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me. It will mean absolutely nothing to me if tomorrow somebody told me, like, let's say tomorrow the greatest artist in the world told me that I was their favorite artist. It wouldn't mean anything to me at all. And if that same person tomorrow told me that I was absolutely shit, it wouldn't mean anything to me either. It doesn't matter. And if somebody bought my artwork off of me tomorrow for like £1 million for a painting, it doesn't mean anything. It's no different to if I won £1 million in the lottery. Like, all it means is that I've got £1 million and it's great news. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm now going to use that so that I can go and make more art. That's it. The fact that it came from this place or that place doesn't matter, except for if it was from someone buying a piece of art from me. That is better than winning it, because that means that you're probably going to be able to sell more.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's
at the end of the day, it should all just be about doing something for you, and making sure that you're like looking after your own mental health and looking after your own sort of interpersonal relationships in your life, and trying to live the life that you want to live. And money is a way of facilitating that, and that's it. That's it. That's all it is. And as far as society at large, I just don't know. I have no idea. They're probably doing are there things that they can do? I mean, I'm not an expert on it. I would say that I don't know. I would certainly say that trying to make sure that opportunities are distributed as equally as possible to all people is that surely has to be a good thing to have as a goal. That's it. That's all I can really say. That's me talking about a principle rather than how do you put that into practice? I don't know, but that would be the idea, right? So if you were to find a way to make that the setup, then you would end up with more Sex Pistols, right, and less of like middle of the road, easy to get along with music that we've already heard. There's some kind of strand going through culture of like people being in love with excess and people being in love with like you have like aspirational TV. So it's so basic, and it's like people they make their entire career from like being on TV, having a reality show, and being like everyone sort of have a window into my life while their life is great. Like they've got a yacht and they've got a mansion and they've got 3 Ferraris and then music videos as well and everything. It's all like it's just so like just it's without being too reductive about it. I feel like when I look at art or when I listen to music or watch a movie or whatever it may be, that's someone's creation, that they're communicating something to me. uh, I do feel like you can really distill it down to do you or do you not have an like feel like drawn to or engaged by or interested in or whatever positive feeling it may be towards that thing, or do you have like a negative reaction? Does it turn you off? Do you dislike it? And I do think that it kind of does boil down to that kind of your responses are happening inside you and you have to listen to them. It's like the heart, and then the brain has to pay attention to the heart. So for me, those sorts of things turn me off, and then I don't want to be turned off by them. I don't have anything against the people that choose to do these things. They're not killing someone, they're not doing a horrible act, but I have to take the time to sort of walk away and go, why did that turn me off so much? Like, why am I so repulsed by that? So like when I look at a lot of things like that are about excess and people with their mansions and all of that stuff, I don't know why, but it just turns me off. It's just a big turn off for me. And then I have to sort of walk away and think about why. That's it. And yet, somebody just picking up a guitar, or for example, and just playing and singing, that's like, that's the opposite. That's like, oh, that I'll give that a go. I see that image, and then my ears are open. They might be awful, and I might hear the first 3 chords and go, no, and just not like it. But the immediate image is like, okay, that's something for me to listen to, and like, so that could be like somebody just doing a drawing on a piece of paper has not lost its potency for me. Like somebody can just get a piece of paper and just draw on it, and it's just the most, minimal amount of materials needed. That's the beauty of doing art. It's accessible to anyone because anyone can pick up a piece of paper and grab a pencil and draw something on it. And it, do you need 16 million pounds of staffing fees to do that? No. You need if you can't afford a piece of paper and a pencil, you can, fuck it, go into WH Smith and still won. I don't care, right? The fact of the matter is, it's pretty accessible, and I don't like the idea of making things elitist or exclusive to a few people, or flaunting or boasting too much about having something that will invoke jealousy in people or envy. It's just a bit of a turn off for me. That's all.
I think we're very alike because I feel exactly the same,
Yeah,
and I
fair
feel this
enough.
whole kind of flex culture we have currently is
True.
so unnecessary. It's unnecessary.
Mm.
It's very, like, to me personally, it's very trivial. Like, yeah, okay, you've got a yacht on a mansion, like that's great. You know, if you worked hard for it, that's great, and I'm happy for you. But I don't care. Like, just like straight up, I just don't care. You
Exactly.
know, like I'm basically
Exactly.
getting on with my life and doing things I need to do. You
Why
know,
would
and I
you care?
think
Why would you give a fuck? Like why would you? If you think about it, why would you?
no, it's true.
It's,
But I think the shame of it is though is that people buy into it. You know,
yeah,
and
they
that's the
do.
shame of it.
They do.
Like that's the shame of it.
But this is
You know, and it's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, carry on.
No, I was about to say, you know, people should buy into it, and I think it's, you know, it's just a shame because it's, you know, I worry, you know, I say like I'm old, but like I worry about, you know, the younger generation because they're born into it. They're born thinking this is normal, and it's not. It's not the way people should necessarily be.
That's true.
But you know, that's not my responsibility, I
I
guess.
mean, well, yeah, I mean that's true too. But I would say that I mean, I'm not saying this to say don't worry because I do think there are things to
Yeah,
worry about. But I would say that one of the reasons why I really like there are certain things that I really really love. So I really love history, and I really enjoy certain, like, if you read like ancient mythology and things like that, or you read certain things from ancient history, or just generally history in general, you see that uh, the human condition has always been the same. If in ancient Greek mythology, for example, I mean that's one of the reasons why I like the idea of positioning myself with my artwork, that I could reach into ancient symbolism and things like that as and when I felt like I wanted to, because it's a very 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 fundamental and rich area for symbolism in art. And when you look into like ancient Greek mythology, for example, you see all of those things that we see today. You see the same kind of vanity and envy and greed and lust and love and humor and happiness and sadness and grief and all of the whole range of emotion. There's nothing there that is the only, so the whole human condition is the same now as it ever has been. So in that sense, that makes me worry less, because I feel like the flex culture was, King Henry VIII, you know, and then
yeah,
it's just something which is not great, but is part of. But it can be kind of fun, if done in the right way. It can be kind of fun. It can be kind of cool. There are things that I do like where people are kind of flexing of what they've got, but it's only if they're really creative with it, or if something about it's a bit different. And I just like to see people being. I guess I like to see a bit of creativity, but
yeah,
the thing which does worry me is the ways in which it's different now to any other point in history. That's where it's worrying, because you don't know where that path is leading us, because we haven't seen it already. So when it comes to social media, the internet, and stuff like that, well, that didn't exist at any point in history up until very recently. So, for me, I don't even need to go back that far to a time where probably for most of my life there were no smartphones, you know.
yeah,
And now it's fucking toxic. It's a fucking toxic poison that's taken over.
yeah.
It's taken over, and is super interesting and amazing, and it's totally incredible innovation, and it's brilliant, and all of those things. I mean, in terms of like humans interaction and you know, human psychology, that's kind of like a real kind of core motivation for me to do art in the first place. It's all about psychology. It's like you're making something and then you're putting it in front of someone, and then it's just like, let's see what they do when they see it. You know, it's like interesting to see how you can garner a response from someone, like what like this equals that, and if I do this differently, then their response changes from that to this. Yeah, so in that respect, it's a like a fucking genius thing, because clearly they've nailed uh, grabbing people's attention, because everyone's looking at their phone all the fucking time, every day, and it's across the board. You know, humans are the same everywhere. They're all of the ways in which we're different. They're all very superfluous, or they're very kind of like surface level. The human condition is the same, and that one of the ways in which that is proven is the way that there's no single part of the world where people didn't grab smartphones and then live in them 24/7. Everyone did. You know, it's not like people in the UK got obsessed and loved it, but then people in Germany just never did. But like everyone's obsessed with filming everything, photographing everything, and then putting it across the social media. And I don't know. It's just looking a lot like that is not good. I don't know. I don't know where that leads. I don't know where we find ourselves in like 50 years. Maybe it's going to be good, but it's unprecedented. So, you know, it could be very, very bad. I don't know.
I think the definition of things have changed, but we haven't changed the actual terms. I think that's where it gets confusing, because the word friend is now a verb, whereas it wasn't before, and it's like, and it shouldn't be,
Yeah.
because it's not a verb. It's not an action. You don't friend somebody. That's not the way life works. But it now is. And I think there's a big disconnect between pre-smartphones and post-smartphones. And I think, like, personally, I'm in the age range where, when I was younger, they didn't have it. When I'm older, obviously now we have it. And to be honest, I think it's not all bad, because there are always positives.
Mm.
But I definitely think that it has taken away it has reshaped the way we consider living. Like the idea of what it means to live. It has definitely reshaped
It
a bit.
has, yeah. It's fundamental, isn't it? I mean, I do think that I
Yeah,
know it's a
absolutely.
tangent, but I do think it's all connected, because, you know,
Oh,
well, I mean,
absolutely.
look, that's the reality of the situation is that the vast majority of people that have seen my artwork, for example, um, are people that have never actually seen it in person. Um,
Yeah.
you know, if there's a million people that looked at a piece of work that I've done online, there's no way a million people saw my drawing in person. There's no way that's happened. You know, I would have known about it. It's
Absolutely.
just not happened. It just
Absolutely.
hasn't happened. So, you know, that's an interesting thing. And like, you know, and it's not to be sniffed at. Like, that's one of the things, that it is very fashionable to sort of denigrate these things, which is what I've been doing, I suppose, by saying I'm a bit worried, you know, that it does feel like there are some kind of worrying aspects to it. But then it has to be said that it's an absolutely incredible, it's absolutely amazing that I made, like, because it's in my nature to, I grew up doing drawings and showing them to people. That's what I really loved doing. I just loved doing a drawing and showing it to people. Probably started from my mum. So I'm going to do a drawing and then me doing it and coming showing it to her. And she, that's really, really good. Go and do another one. And then next
Yeah.
thing you know, I'm going out in the world doing drawings and showing them to people, you know, and then suddenly I'm able to do that to the whole world, with no time delay as well. I can just do. I could do right now,
Yeah.
do a drawing of whatever I want, and then just put it out there into the world, you know. And there are a lot of
Of course.
people with a lot of good energy that will respond and say, "Oh, you know, I really appreciate this. I really like it," and then you can immediately feel good that you've sort of done something that's meant something to someone somewhere. So that's all facilitated by this incredible technology, and that's the good side of it. So there you go. I've
Absolutely.
been
So
even-handed.
absolutely no, it's important to be. That's the thing. Like I
Mm.
feel like in a lot of interviews that I have with people, I always rant on about how I don't like social media, or at least I'm not the biggest fan of social
Mm.
media. But I always have to say, like, I'm very grateful for it because I wouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
doing this right now if I didn't have social media.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, yeah, like you have to be even about it. There are always positives and negatives to everything.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, true.
you know, so let's actually get into your work then. Let's talk about the themes in your work
Okay.
because I think your work fascinates me a lot for a lot of different reasons. And I think part of it is because of the alias, that's part of it. But
Mm-hmm.
the second part of it is also because your work is very stylistic. It's very, I know it's yours if I see it.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I haven't seen it for that long, I
Mm-hmm.
know it's yours. It has a certain sense of style,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the idea of schools and the idea of recurring symbolism of motifs. So can you talk a bit about, so how did you decide upon the kind of motifs such as schools? And obviously at the moment, snakes and things. Like, how do you
Mm.
decide what kind of symbolism you want to include in your work, and why is symbolism important?
I know what you mean. I definitely agree with your assessment of my work. It's like it's a certain style, and I think that I have been constantly my entire life that I've spent drawing and painting or whatever. I've spent that entire time developing my own style, and um, that's my way of just being me in a way, just being myself and being unique because everyone's unique. Um, but not everyone is able to necessarily do justice to their own uniqueness in the way they express themselves because they fall into the trap of trying to imitate what someone else has done, um, or trying to seek approval from other people. Um, so I think that those are probably like some of the starting places of my work is like mindset of honestly not giving a fuck at all about what people think and doing what I want to do is that's my starting place. Um, and being really interested in sort of scratching my own itch, and then having faith in the idea that if it does it for me, it's going to do it for someone else out there, and taking it for granted that that is not going to be everyone. And so those are kind of good, kind of foundational ways to sort of set yourself up to go out in the world and do something like this. Because if you don't have those ideas in your head and then you go and make work, there are loads and loads of ways in which it can go wrong for you. You know, in terms of um, you do something that doesn't really do it for you, but you think it's what people want to see. And then when they don't like it, then you feel totally fucked off because you're like, well, it didn't do it for me. I just thought it was what you guys wanted. And then it doesn't do anything for anyone. And then you just go, well, that really was a waste of time. So you already have kind of given yourself, it's almost like a form of insurance. It's like some kind of like emotional insurance policy where you go, if no one likes this, at least I do. Right. So then you're totally cool already. You've got nothing to lose because you do what you want to do. So that's the starting place. And then from there, there's um, the use of symbolism. For me, it comes from a few different places. So I'm kind of into Like there are lots of different things that I've read and watched and listened to that that sort of tend to kind of circle around this. There are certain ideas that I think probably more than anywhere they come from Carl Jung, the like
Alright.
super genius psychoanalyst guy. I don't even know if I got the career title like correct as whatever he was. His ideas are pretty good in terms of things that are like help me to decide on how to handle my own impulses, my own urges. So when it comes to, there are a few different things that I've read and heard that come from Carl Jung to do with, first of all, like there's the idea of the shadow. So the shadow is this thing that everyone has in their psyche that through your upbringing, the ideas of how you should behave and what you should think and what you should do and what you should say and what's civil and what's polite and what's morally correct. But you will almost certainly have things that appear in your subconscious as urges, almost like evil urges that you might find worrying or concerning because you don't want to do them. They're bad things you think I shouldn't do, and that is something which people don't know how to deal with. Like they're not necessarily trained to deal with the fact that they have got these kind of animal instincts and urges that, to varying degrees. Some people are probably like dangerous people that probably should be locked away, but there are lots of different degrees to which there's this kind of shadow in the people's psyche that is kind of wanting to come out, like urges that people have. That's where people sometimes just say mean things or do mean things, or they do dark things, or people become obsessed with death. And there are lots of people out there in the world that do a lot of bad shit, and everyone tunes in to watch. Everyone watches documentaries about murderers. It's the biggest
Yeah.
thing on the news, and there's some serial killer that did something, whatever. And the shadow is just a really, really interesting thing to try to to understand and to, in a healthy way, try um, to understand what, like depending on what your restrictions are, what type of person you are, your shadow is going to probably be slightly different in terms of what the negative urges that you might have. But it's there, and isn't necessarily the right thing to do is to ignore that part of who you are. It's more of an interesting thing for me to like draw symbols that kind of represent. Sometimes I like to draw symbols that kind of represent like the darker side of, often they're dark symbols. It's either dangerous or they like represent death or whatever, because it's something that I'm like almost challenging myself to sort of look at the darkness and sort of think about it at least. It's something that I think is important to sort of look at and think about. Um, and there's also so I do believe that if you have like a calling, something is calling you, that it's very, very important to listen to it and to do it, right? So I don't necessarily know why I draw the things that I draw. So I remember there was a time when I was drawing so many skulls all the time, and I didn't really know why I was drawing so many skulls all the time, but I knew that I wanted to keep doing it, and that was that. So that was my philosophy, was that you should just do it because you feel it and you want to do it. But at the same time, I also felt this strong urge to draw flowers all the time, which I still do have. Um, and so I don't pressurize myself at all. I just let these things sort of float around in my brain, and then when it sort of lands, it lands. Like if I feel the need to draw something, then I'll draw it. And so as it turns out, what you see is what I felt the need to do. That being said, there are some things that I can track the journey of why I ended up with it, and there are some things that I can't. So some things I find really, really difficult to pinpoint. I definitely became obsessed with, in the past, I became obsessed with the idea of like repetition and almost like disordered kind of art. And it's something you don't really see so much now in my work, but when I was younger I used to do all the time, was sort of do I used to love getting a huge big piece of paper, like maybe, I don't know, like 60 by 60 centimeters or something, like pretty big, and then just drawing the same thing over and over and over and over again. And I was interested in the idea that the person that sees it knows that that was drawn by a person and then thinks that you're fucking mad for doing it. Like, I like the idea that you could invoke like concern by just, almost, or like people will be like, "Are you okay?" Just because you've just fucking just drawn the same thing so many times. That in itself is interesting because it just shows the power of like drawing. That you could draw, as opposed to drawing something which is run of the mill, like just thinking about it in a totally different way, thinking about it rather than thinking from the perspective of I'm going to draw this thing. Like, okay, there's a person standing next to a tree. I'm going to draw a person. I'm going to draw a tree. You could draw something that is actually hard to explain what it is you're even drawing, and you just know that it's going to make people sort of question your sanity when they look at it. So there are loads of sort of things like that that interest me, but I'm also able to pinpoint certain symbols and where they came from because I like to read and watch and listen to. Um, there are certain things I'm interested in. So for example, I did the recent drawing painting thing that I did with a snake and loads of apples around it, and I know
Yes.
exactly why I did it. And for me, that's like my favorite piece that I've done in the Sacred Monolith kind of
Hero.
era. Yeah, or whatever this is. Yeah, that's my favorite one because it made the most sense to me, I suppose, because I knew exactly what I was doing. Like, I watched some long, really, really in depth, really interesting um, lecture about the symbolism of the Garden of Eden, um, and the reason why those symbols are the ones that are there in terms of like, why it's a snake, why those are apples, what does it mean, what's it all about, and like the deeper meanings behind it, and the reason why that story has kind of remained over so many years. And it just occurred to me that this is incredibly powerful symbolism, and that it would almost be stupid of me not to embrace that power, um, and just kind of, it's like surfing on a wave. It's like I didn't make that powerful symbolism. I just am in the privileged position where I'm able to use it. So then I'm able to use it in whatever way that I want. And then I knew that what I wanted to do was for the apple to make it so the apples looked really, really attractive and really like luscious and fruity and zesty and whatever, and vibrant. And I wanted the snake to be right up in your face, all across it and all in the middle of it all, so that you knew that you had to get tangled with that snake to get that apple. And that was just like it's an unsubtle way. It's like a shotgun approach of dealing with that subject matter, because I could have done, some like super like renaissancey, like really elegant scene where it's a tree and there's a person, you got the naked bodies and they're reaching up for the apple. But instead I wanted it to be like, you, the viewer, are the person who's presented with the temptation, and you're also equally presented with the serpent. Like, you are in it when you look at it. And that's like why that's my favorite piece, in terms of like, I'm able to track my own journey of like where I got the idea, why I did it the way I did it, and how I arrived at it. And executed it well enough that I was happy with it. And that's by no means my most popular one, because it's just like, it can be quite basic. People just love a skull, you know what I mean? But the skulls are endlessly interesting to me, and I think, again, there's an element of natural forms are the most interesting things. First of all, uh, that's a totally subjective thing, but that's my view. Like, I find natural forms interesting because they have unusual shapes that have kind of evolved to be what they are. They are there for, they somehow ended up being what they are. It's not a conscious choice that something chooses to grow in a certain way. It ends up being that way through, the limitations of, or through evolution, and through surroundings, and through whatever it is that makes a thing grow in the way that it grows, and it becomes interesting, and it's not perfect, in inverted commas. It's asymmetrical and unusual. And so a skull, already in terms of like aesthetics, is already ticking all the boxes for me. Like, you could take any bit of bone, and it would tick all the boxes for me. I could study it and draw it. I'd be happy to do it. It could be like a little toe bone, and I would probably be quite happy to draw it. It'd be interesting, but also it's a representation of the human form. And when I used to do portraits, which I really enjoyed, and I do love doing portraits, I noticed early on that when people would commission portraits from me, they would want to have things edited for the sake of their vanity. So they would want to like have their receding hairline fixed, or they'd want to look a little bit less overweight, or they'd want their teeth to be straighter or something. And I didn't want to do that, because I didn't believe in that. That wasn't what I was there for. When I was doing art, I was more interested in the quirks of people's unique qualities of how they looked. I'm less interested in airbrushed magazine images than I am in, someone's ugly photo that they've got. Like, I'm much more interested in someone's ugly photo that they've got. And so I knew that it would be negative for my development as an artist if I built a situation where I was being commissioned to do portraits for people, and then having to, because I needed to sell work to get money to allow myself to do more work. If I needed to, in order to do that, I needed to do those things for people. I would never be able to do like what Picasso did, and just be like, I want to draw this person's head as a triangle and a circle. You know what I mean? Which is, maybe that's what I want to do. I want to be able to do what the fuck I want. That's why I'm here. So I can't do portraits for people unless I am absolutely not in any way interested in selling them, and it's just for me, in which case I do whatever I want. So I knocked portraits on the head, but I still wanted to draw people. So that kind of got me into drawing skeletons and skulls as well. And I am really interested in ancient symbols, and I just don't think anything has got quite more of an impact as an ancient symbol. A human, like a skull. You could show a skull if you had a time machine and you went back to, the first humans, to walk the earth, and you presented them with a skull. They will know what it is. It's not like a lot of the symbols that we see. If you drive a car, you need to be able to recognize a whole load of symbols that we might take for granted, like the little symbols that you're used to seeing that mean that the road's going to have a bend in it, or that people are going to be crossing the road or whatever. But those symbols might not necessarily be. If you go far enough in time, there will probably come a point where those symbols don't mean anything to anyone. There are some things that have always meant something and always will to other people. And so I feel like skulls and skeletons are kind of timeless in that sense. And I'm much more interested in making work that is timeless than something which is like effective in the here and now and then kind of fades away. So yeah, when I used to do, because as I've been doing it for a long time, when I used to do drawings when I was younger, I look back at them and the one I know which were the ones that I still love now with all the years that have gone on, and I know which are the ones that I don't really like. So yeah, it tends to be things that have like very, very powerful ancient symbols in them. So yeah, there you go. There's a few reasons why I draw those things.
I think it's really interesting though, and I'm quite curious as opposed to if you ever consider that because your images may potentially to some people seem, somewhat darker, that the reception it might get might be a bit different to somebody who created pictures that were quote unquote happier. Do you ever consider that when you're creating the work?
Oh yeah, for sure. I just don't. I don't really care. Like I know that I have to say this actually. When I came back to um, doing artwork as like a kind of second, second run through this thing, I knew that I wanted this to be more. I don't know if this is the right word for it, but more masculine than my previous round of like my first go at having an art career. I still have always done drawings and images of skulls, but it was a lot more of a feminine kind of aesthetic to my drawings. And I had a personal belief when I used to do my work that I should try to work in that domain of doing work that's a little bit if you saw it, you might be like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. It's not feminine, but that's how I feel about it. It used to be. I used to use a lot more pink and a lot more sort of pastel colors, and there's probably more floral, and there was a lot more pattern work. And I genuinely believed, and I think that it makes sense, but that was my view at the time that I should place myself out of my comfort zone, because what will happen is that my true nature of like what I'm actually like will come through, and so it'll be kind of counterbalanced by by me purposefully leaning into trying to make it a bit more feminine, because I think that my work will be kind of masculine anyway by virtue of me just sort of being like that. So I used to always work like that. And it worked really well for me because it was kind of a good balance, and it was kind of delicate and beautiful and moved in, and I probably had a lot more of a female kind of audience than my work will do now. Maybe I don't know. Honestly, don't know. I'm only saying that actually based on the analytics because I've seen the analytics, but it might just be social media in general. But at the moment, it's looking to be more men than women following my work. But I really don't do that on purpose. And I'd probably be happy like anyone else would if it was just a straight 50-50. But it was definitely the other way around with my work in the past. It was definitely more women than men. So I feel like that might be because I had wanted to do. I wanted to actually do something different. I didn't want to just do what I'd done before. And so that's why it was really hard for me to do something again, because I had really invested myself in my previous work, and all of those things that I believed, I still believe that it's good for me to sort of try to do more sort of feminine work while in taking it for granted that I'm going to bring a sort of masculine energy to it anyway. And it worked really, really well for me. But that's absolutely not what I'm doing now, because I've gone, okay, that was my old work, and this is me returning to this business, and I don't want to do what I've done before. So what am I going to do? Well, let me just own my sort of masculinity, and let me just make it like brutal, and I don't give a shit. I'm just going to go do it and let it be dark, let it be brutal. If that's the way, if that's what I feel the need to do, like I will stop going down that road if I feel turned off by it. So I feel more and more like I want to do more aggressive work. Um, so I'm feeling like at the moment, like it's going to get more aggressive and maybe even darker. And then when I reach a point where I look at it and I go, oh, that's doing my head in actually, then I'll probably like try to give myself. But what I ultimately want is I want to have a huge range, and so I've got beautiful like flower drawings and things like that in my portfolio of work, and I can always go back to that to give myself a respite from it. But I'm kind of into clashes in nature. I'm into like these kind of shows of power in nature at the moment, and I kind of like the idea of doing some kind of quite aggressive pieces that show animals in collision, with their various different natural weaponry that they've got.
Well, that's really fascinating. That's really fascinating. And that's because one thing I like to ask people a lot is at what point does an artist and their audience merge, and how does having an audience looking at a work change the work you create? And I think that's really interesting because it seems to me then, rather than be controlled by the audience that sees it or the analytics of your work, like you're kind of, I don't know, there's something really clever about that you're already kind of aware, kind of the point at which you're coming from to create the work before the analytics and your audience, for instance, is involved. I think that's really clever. But I also think it's really clever the idea that you've thought about it in terms of, whether that necessarily needs to be thought about it in terms of, but the idea of masculine and feminine, and particularly like the balance of the two. That's actually a really interesting concept. It's not something I've ever thought about in terms of not just my own work, but just work in general, and actually how, the gender of the artist may play quite an important role in the work they create, or don't create, for instance.
Yeah,
that's quite an interesting consideration.
no, that's true.
It's not something I've ever thought
I
about.
mean, anything that you do, they're all just different. What's the word? Is it axis, or what's the I don't know. What's the plural? Is it axiom? I don't know. It's just a different. It's just a different axis for which you you can sort of measure work. It's like,
Yeah,
it doesn't need to be a conscious thing. It will always fall somewhere within the spectrum between masculine and feminine, whatever you do. But it's just one of the things that I thought about when I look back at my old work, is I sort of noticed how far I went into sort of like more feminine aesthetics, which I with all of the work that I did, I thought some of it worked well, some of it didn't. But um, I enjoyed being able to sort of look back and think in that way, because that's one of the things that could sort of keep you looking back at your work, is kind of having new ways of measuring it. So it's just another axis. I could go, okay, I'm going to look back at all of my old work purely from the perspective of technical skill, and I could judge everything on the grounds of like what's better or worse based on what's more or less technically skilled. But then I could not think about it like that at all, and I could look back at my work and judge it on, what do I feel has the most powerful symbolism, you know, um, and it might be the less technically skilled work that is more powerful. But then you can also go back and say, let me have a look and go, you know, where does this fall on the sort of masculine feminine scale? And I definitely think that my old work, I shouldn't go on about it too much because I'm not sharing or anything, but it is true that I was purposefully leaning into doing that, like going, I'm quite sort of like blokey in a way, and like I'm masculine, and like it's good for me to reach over and do something which is not what I would be expected to do, because I'm going to bring that energy anyway, and there's going to be a balance that's going to be struck by me doing something which is a little bit different to what I am. So I'd use a lot more, um, as I say, I'd be using a lot more sort of like
Yeah.
pink and pastel colors, and I'd be using a lot more floral kind of imagery and prettifying things. And then I was, it genuinely did work for me to do that. It's just the age old idea of like putting yourself out of your comfort zone to grow. But that, in a way, that's exactly why I'm not doing that now, because I did that for years. So that's something that I know about, and uh, this is something else. So I'm more like leaning into sort of like there are a few things which are new areas for me to explore now. So doing like things which are a bit kind of paranormal and a bit kind of sci-fi. Um,
Yeah.
and that's something that I never really did in the past, and I really get a kick out of that. And I also like leaning into, you know, doing, dark imagery with, dangerous animals and things like that, and trying to fuck with people a little bit, like doing like a four-eyed tiger with like chromatic aberrations. So it's like really, really, really horrible to, because it's
Absolutely
hard
cool.
to even look at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, that's just what's interesting to me right now.
I think that's super fascinating, and I don't know you don't talk about too much more because I think you probably spoke about it enough, but I think it's also interesting that because you've really had as you said like the first run, I think
Mm.
that kind of only strengthens the work you do now because you almost have a set of rules for yourself of what not to do, or at least both like what works, what's cool, and you've been through it so that like the ups and downs of it. So now because you just don't care and
Mm.
you enjoy what you're doing now. And it's like it's about the enjoyment. It's about, what you find interesting, what you want to do for yourself. And I think it only strengthens your work now because you have like a reflection, not reflection.
So, yeah,
You have like you have a constraint of what not a constraint, but you have like your own set of rules of what not to
yeah,
do.
no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, no, there are definitely lessons learned, um, and you know, I'm definitely happy to be feeling like I'm in the driving seat, and I'm in control of what I'm doing at this point. You know, I had felt when I was younger, I felt it had kind of all sort of taken off a little bit early, and I was not really prepared for it, and I was just a little bit like, what is happening right now? Like I just didn't think that I was. I don't know if I was ready to like. But the thing is, you could spend your whole life feeling not ready, So it
Yeah, absolutely.
probably helped me to be sort of just exposed like that. But I'm super happy at this point in my life to be able to sort of start a project and really feel like I'm owning it, and I'm in control of it, and I know what I'm doing. Um, so I guess I'm just
I think that's oh no,
I
sorry,
was,
continue.
I was just saying, I guess I'm just gonna just let it grow and just see, see how it develops. basically.
Absolutely. I think that's why I like talking to artists who are older, because the experience you have of life, it teaches you so much more. Because, it's great to have success when you're young, because obviously, well, there's pitfalls and, there's good and bad parts, but like success when you're young is good. But the problem is that you're not ready for it in your life. Whereas now you have life experience, and the kind of the way you react to things and situations are different. So it's, and I think, from my own personal experience, I guess, it just kind of seems to me that the things I care about now are not the things I cared about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's easier to, like, as I get older personally, like there's a lot of things that I let go of that I really would have been more bothered about when I was younger, like views, for instance, and stats, and if people like my work, or if people, are, all that kind of stuff doesn't really mean much to me. Like, I'm much more important about creating things and having conversations with people and engaging with people. And
it's really
I feel like
good
when
that
you're
you see like
older,
that. It's really that's really, I have to say, I commend you for having that view. Yeah, it's a really good way to approach it, for sure.
Because I just feel like, and we'll go back to your work in a second, because I've still got to have a lot of stuff to ask you if you're still okay with that.
Okay.
But like for me, I just feel like we live in a society which is very, and I feel like I say this in every interview, but we live in a society that's very much about the now, and they're very much about, like, today's stats and today's views, and how much money did you make today? And it's like, if we all stopped and thought about, our work as an archive, then I think we would all be a lot less stressed, and we would all be a lot more kind of caring about what we do. Because, like, for me, like the Flying Fruit Bowl, like, I don't care if people don't see it today. I'm interested in what people are going to think of it in 10 years' time when they discover it for the first time and they start going through the archive. Like, that's what I care about. I care about making sure that what I'm posting is quality, not for me, but for other people to be inspired. Like, I don't care if nobody sees it today. That's not down to me. That's just how I felt about things anyway. What do I know?
No, it's a good way. It's a good way to look at things. I just feel like there's no lever that you can pull to make people think what you want them to think, or to behave the way you want them to behave. So if you kind of are kind of putting yourself in a position where you're at the whim of how other people perceive you or how they treat you, then you lose control over your own life. And it's really, really important to be able to, it's not like you can choose to be happy. Like, you can't, like, happiness comes when it comes, but for you to have that kind of purchase over, like what your environment is and how it is conducive towards helping you to be content, happy, or whatever. It's like, by making it something you have control over, you are giving yourself a much, much higher chance of having a good life. Let's put it that way. So if you a lot of people are at the whim of other people's kind of fickle opinions, and I just feel bad for them, because even if you've got loads of money, you're not gonna, if that's what you, if other people deciding they don't like you is enough for you to become miserable, then no amount of money is going to make up for it, really. So yeah, it's all about sort of, like, I don't know, trying to kind of strengthen your own outlook.
That concludes the first part of my conversation with Sacred Monolith. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or comments about it, please send me an email at theflyingfruitbowl@gmail.com, or via social media sites such as Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. The Flying Fruit Bowl audio interviews can be found on a variety of sites such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the platform, please consider subscribing or sharing this interview with friends and family. Also, please don't forget to check out theflyingfruitbowl.co.uk for daily art inspiration. And if you're a creative, please get in touch for a chance to be featured or interviewed. Once again, thank you very much for listening. And until next time, folks, please stay safe.